Hey guys, it's me, Mr. 250, and welcome back to Banshee's Last Crime. Searched the, Mr. Jones's room, and didn't really find a whole lot of interest, so unfortunately we're kind of back at square one. Let's continue. Frozen to our cores, we left the room and returned to the lounge. No one was missing, and everyone looked to be okay. Did you find anything? Mr. Forrest asked, glancing at the three of us. No, unfortunately. We think maybe the killer ran off with Mr. Jones's possessions. I was so cold I couldn't speak properly, so Grace answered for me. He was probably carrying a lot of money. That's what got him killed, Mr. Forrest said, thinking aloud. Ooh, I'm freezing. I stood in front of the fireplace, trying desperately to warm up. Whoa! Suddenly, there was a heavy wet thud outside the window. That startled me, wow. I was startled, but then I remembered that it was just snow falling off the roof. Scared you again, huh? Grace sounded amused, despite everything that was going on. Anyone would be scared by a noise like... I stopped in mid-sentence when it hit me. What's wrong? You've got a strange look on your face. It must have been strange indeed for Grace to suddenly sound so worried. The truth was, right at that moment, a theory was starting to take form in my brain. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy to get anyone else to accept it. I started to explain. Well, let's see. Do we know who killed Mr. Jones? The only person that we're really convinced that could have well, let's see. Was it Bobby? Who? We think Bobby about something, but I don't want to blame Bobby at this point. Now, who killed Abby? Oh... Well, the only people that could have killed Abby, we said, were the girls and Faberge, which I'm not overly convinced about either of them. I know he's behind it all. Now, that's a hard one, because we kind of figured that somebody couldn't have killed both of them. I'm going to say, for the point of the Let's Play at this point, I don't have a clue. Don't worry, we'll get back to those ones later. I was pretty much thinking out loud, but I guess Grace overheard me. She looked disappointed. Oh, in here I thought you would have figured it out by now. What does that mean? Grace was expecting big things from me. As soon as I realized that, my mind suddenly kicked into high gear. Motivation burning through my veins. Wait a sec. That's like this goes, and he's like, but then no, in the window, runs over there, but the cat. Max, what are you mumbling about? I've got it. Now I know what must have happened. Really? Are you really sure? Grace sounded surprised. I looked at her and nodded. Then, I turned to face everyone and began to explain. When we heard the sound of the breaking glass, everyone was in the lounge except for Bobby. That's why I thought at first that if the killer was one of us, then Bobby was most likely suspect. I would honestly say at this point it's gotta be an outside person, somebody not one of us, because... it's just not possible for them to kill everybody, unless, of course, two different people were the killers. Now, isn't that scary? Because now you're not just worried about one single person, two people, and they could possibly work together. Everyone looked uneasily over at Bobby, but he simply returned their gazes, an obstinate look on his face. But I realized that, with a simple trick, even someone that had been in the lounge when it happened could still be the killer. On hearing that, Bobby's face visibly relaxed. A simple trick? Grace asked. You know, what if there's this? What if Mr. Jones was the killer? Okay, I know it sounds a little far-fetched, but hear me out for a moment. What if Mr. Jones cut off one of his arms, then his leg, then his other leg, then his other arm? I know that sounds pretty far-fetched, but, you know, maybe he went really fast, like a master sushi chef. We'll put that one on hold for a bit. A simple trick? Yeah, a time delay trick. Time delay? Like a bomb? Exactly. When we heard the glass breaking, we all ran towards the guest rooms. But we can't really be sure that's when the window was broken. But you saw it, the window was broken. Mr. Forrest didn't seem to understand my point. That's what I meant by the time delay. Of course it was broken. But we don't really know that it happened when we heard the sound. Do you follow me? So, you mean the sound could have been made after? Grace's face suddenly lit up with the sudden revelation. Exactly, I said, nodding. After dinner, the killer went to Mr. Jones's room. killed him, and cut up the body. Then he broke the window without making a sound. How? Well, for example, you can put duct tape on the window before you break it. That muffles the sound and keeps the glass from going everywhere. It's what professional thieves do. Sounds like you're an expert in the field, son. Mr. Buchanan stared at me as he was reappraising me in light of the new information. I quickly shook my head. No, it's just something I saw in the movies, which are obviously the most best idea. I'm getting bad with words, but it's the best way to get information is from the movies. Okay, so let's say he broke the window without making any noise. Then what? Then the killer takes out a tape recorder that he had ready and puts it down somewhere and... Wait a minute. We didn't find anything like that in there. It didn't have to be in that room. After all, when we first heard it, we didn't know where the sound came from, right? Well, sure, but something that could make that loud of a noise. Wouldn't it have to be pretty big? I had to admit, Grace had seized on the weakest part of my theory. Not only that, the idea of bringing in a pre-recorded sound of glass breaking sounds pretty far-fetched to me. Mr. Forrest cast further doubt on my explanation. Well, he could have recorded it when he actually broke the glass. Maybe it was a lot quieter when he did it, and he just played it back at the louder volume. That's not what it sounded like to me. You can't make something sound different just by amplifying it. Grace was right, so I made a small adjustment to my theory. Okay, how about this then? The sound we heard was an actual window breaking, but it wasn't the one in that room. It was a piece of glass that the killer brought in for that purpose. I looked around, challenging anyone to try to poke holes in my new idea. But in that case, the killer would have had to break that other glass somewhere, right? Also, how would he have snuck that glass you're talking about in here in the first place? Grace wasted no time bombarding me with questions. You're supposed to be on my side, Grace. Look, let's not get bogged down in the details, okay? I was beginning to feel irritated. If my theory was wrong, it meant that Bobby was the most likely killer after all. But putting aside that, Mr. Jones for the moment, I don't think Bobby killed Abby. It seemed to me that I saw a brief flash of gratitude in Bobby's eyes. So, if it wasn't me, then who's the killer? Bobby asked hoarsely. I stopped for a moment and prepared my words carefully. Whether it was a tape recorder or something else, as long as the killer had the ability to play back the sound of breaking glass, it means that anyone in the lounge at that time could potentially be the murderer. But even if that's true, there are some people that either didn't go near the guest rooms or didn't have the time to do it. We can eliminate them from the suspect list. First, Grace and I were either in the dining room or the lounge from dinner time until the moment the incident happened. We never once went near the guest rooms, and several of you can back us up on that. Mr. Forrest was in the dining room, and then stayed with us the whole time afterwards. I don't know where his wife was for some of the time, but she was almost certainly in the kitchen cleaning up after her. I looked at Miss Forrest questioningly, and she nodded in response, so I continued. Mr. Faberge arrived here well after dinner was over. He did go to his own room, but he was only there long enough to put the luggage down. Even with a chainsaw, he wouldn't have had enough time to do... well, that. So far, no one had any argument with my line of thinking, so I went on. As for the three girls, Miss Oakley, Miss Starks, and Miss Madison, or Mason, they went back to their room briefly after they found the note from the killer, but they came back to the lounge after that. They didn't have enough time to do it either. I paused for a moment, because I was hesitant to say what was coming next. Yeah, so? Mr. Buchanan asked, a troubled look on his face. I tried not to look at him as I continued. That's it. That eliminates everyone except for Mr. and Mrs. Buchanan. In other words, the killer must be one of those two. What evidence do you have for that? Maybe I'm missing something here. Give me just one moment. I'll be right back. Alright, back again. Amber sat there, looking back and forth at Mr. Buchanan and me, with a dumbfounded expression on her face. But Mr. Buchanan exploded, spittle flying from his mouth. Why, you little... How dare you accuse me? What in God's green earth makes you think I had time to butcher a man like that? Same goes for my wife. We were together the whole time, right, Amber? I could see the surprise in Amber's face immediately. Yes, of course. A gut-wrenching silence followed, but I wasn't going to stop now. I went on. Now, I like this music a lot, by the way. Now, let's think about the second attack. When Mr. Faubers was assaulted, the three of us were outside. Mr. Forrest, Bobby, and me. Almost everyone else was waiting in the lounge. Except for one person. All eyes in the room immediately went to Mr. Buchanan. Me? But I was in here too. No. When we came back, you weren't here. According to Grace. You told her you were trying to go back to your room to try out your phone again. You confirmed that to me yourself. Oh, yeah, I did. But even so, if I was in my room, how'd you figure I could hit Faubers in the head? Good question. But if you think about it, it's pretty simple. I stopped there and looked around the room, but no one said a word. Here's how. The place Faubers was attacked was directly below Mr. Jones's room. Mr. Jones's room is right next to the Buchanan's room. It wouldn't be all that difficult to cross that distance with no one noticing, would it? Grace gasped. You're saying he attacked Faubers from Mr. Jones's room? Probably. It'd be simple. Just tie something heavy and hard, like a rock, to the end of a rope. Then wait for your victim to appear and drop it. Then you can swing it around like a pendulum until you hit him. I swung my arms lightly to show how it could be done. That's why Bobby and Mr. Forrest didn't see anyone. Whoever did it wasn't even out there with them. That's a little iffy, isn't it? Just like pendulum rock swinging, like, where do you go to train for that? Oh man, I missed him again, better keep trying. Slow down, you two! At first, I hadn't had much confidence in my theory, but as I went through it step by step, I became more and more convinced I was right. You! Suddenly, Bobby leapt from his chair and threw himself on Mr. Buchanan. I'll kill you! Screaming like a wild animal, Bobby wrapped his hands around the older man's throat. Veins in his neck popped out as he squeezed with all his strength. Mr. Buchanan flailed wildly, trying in vain to dislodge his attacker's hands. At first, the others around the room just sat there, too stunned to even move. But when Mr. Buchanan began gurgling from somewhere deep in his throat, Mr. Forrest found his voice. Bobby! Bobby, stop it! As if Mr. Forrest's words freed him from his paralysis, Faubers suddenly grabbed Bobby from behind, trying to pull him off. That's enough, Bobby! You'll kill him! My instinctual reaction had been to step in front of Grace to protect her. Let me go! Let me go! Bobby seemed possessed by an inhuman strength, and it took both Faubers, himself a very powerful man, and Mr. Forrest to finally pull him off. Mr. Buchanan coughed and gasped for breath, one hand clutching his throat. His wife, Amber, just stood there shaking, her face as white as a sheet. I'll kill you, I swear to God I'll kill you! Bobby continued to fix his murderous gaze on Buchanan, while Faubers held him tightly in a full Nelson. Bobby, get a hold of yourself! Can you believe that? Mr. Buchanan! I bet that Texas accent was just a ruse the whole time. He wasn't really Texan, he was just trying to throw the suspicion off himself. Mr. Forrest slapped Bobby hard across the cheek. The sound rang out like a gunshot, shocking everyone into silence. Bobby stopped struggling and stared at Mr. Forrest in disbelief. Mr. Forrest, why are you... Grim-faced, Mr. Forrest sounded like a stern father lecturing his son. Without absolute proof, we have no right to decide if Mr. Buchanan is guilty of anything. Do you hear me? Next, he turned angrily towards me. And you, Max. Could you stop with your crazy conspiracy theories? You're just getting everyone more upset. I could feel my hackles starting to rise. But before I could even open my mouth, Grace came to my defense. They're not crazy, Uncle Bill. Just because you worked with that guy a long time ago, that doesn't mean you know him. If you think Max's theory is so silly, tell us why. Mr. Forrest started to open his mouth, then thought the better of it. All of a sudden, Molly stood up and shouted, I don't want to be anywhere near this monster! I'm going back to my room! I assume by this monster she was referring to Mr. Buchanan. We're going too! Tiffany and Debbie got up as well. Wait a minute. We're all still safer as a group, please! Mr. Forrest tried to get in front of the girls and convince them not to go, but Molly fixed him with a withering look that stopped him cold. Then tie the guy up somewhere. I'm not sipping cocoa with a serial killer, Molly screamed in an angry, high-pitched voice. I thought of her as just a normal young lady, but now she was glaring at Mr. Forrest with a look of pure unbridled rage. seeing her transform so suddenly sent a chill down my spine. I'm going, and I'm not leaving my room for the rest of the night. Without a further word, the three girls angrily marched back to their room. Is that really alright? Won't those girls be in danger, all alone like that? Fobbers looked worried as he watched the girls head down the stairs. Well, if the killer were dead, we'd all sleep a lot better, Bobby said, his eyes drilling into Mr. Buchanan. So, you still think I did it, huh? Well, let me tell you something, Bobby. I reckon the biggest suspect is you. Squeezing out them fake girly tears. I'm on to you, mister. What did you say? Bobby's face turned an even brighter shade of red. Enough! Please, just stop! Screamed a grief-filled voice. Colleen covered her face with both hands and collapsed on the floor, sobbing. Bobby froze. His fury transformed into surprise. Accusing each other. Attacking each other. Can't you see what's happening? But, Colleen, he killed our Abby. Colleen, oblivious to his words, continued on. This is just a nightmare. It can't be happening. It can't be. Just let me wake up. Babbling and staring blankly into space, it was as if something deep inside her had suddenly snapped. Colleen, pull yourself together. Mr. Forrest shook her by the shoulders, staring her straight in the eyes. Colleen began to whimper softly, like a frightened child. Bobby, watching the drama play out in front of his eyes, turned to me. Max. Yeah? This theory of yours, how sure are you of it? So, we could lie, because we kind of just made that theory up on the fly. Very sure. Now let's think about that for a moment, because if we're going with this theory of that the first murder, or the first, the murder could have been done ahead of time and the glass was broken by some remote method, which, I would say isn't terribly far-fetched. And then for the second one, the way he did it was a little far-fetched, but he definitely had no real alibi, like a real good alibi, while everyone else was doing their thing. We'll go with very sure for this time. In that case, what do we do with him? I glanced over at Mr. Buchanan. He had a sullen, hurt expression on his face and wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't think my theory was wrong, but could this man really be the killer? Staring at his face, I felt myself gradually losing confidence. Was it possible that this friendly, affable Texas businessman was a deranged psychotic who mangled innocent people? Going by looks alone, none of us looked capable of committing the murders. They never do, I suppose. If it was that easy, the police would have had the easiest job in the world. I wonder if we could... Thinking out loud, I was ready to start throwing out some ideas when Faberge nervously interrupted. I don't know for sure if Mr. Buchanan is the murderer, but right now, he's the most likely suspect. If it turns out that we're wrong, we'll owe him a big apology, but... Well, we have to put the safety of the rest of us first. I think we've got to lock him up somewhere, like maybe the cellar or something. The cellar? Good idea, Bobby said, with a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Hey, now just wait a gosh darned minute. That place must be freezing cold. You couldn't get me to go down there for all the tea in China. Mr. Buchanan stared at Bobby with determined eyes, shaking his head like a child refusing to eat his broccoli. It's a wine cellar. We keep it at about 50 degrees, so it's not all that cold. Besides, if you want, you can take some blankets and a hand warmer. Yeah, but... Mr. Buchanan was becoming increasingly nervous, so I spoke up. Come on, Mr. Buchanan. I think it's a good idea, too. This is for your protection. If Mr. Forrest holds on to the key, we can be sure that Bobby won't come and attack you during the night. And if you're innocent, it'll keep you safe from the real killer, too. Mr. Buchanan glanced back and forth at Bobby and me, weighing his options. I guess you're right, he said, reluctantly giving in. Way some of you people are acting, it'd be safer for me down there. Great, it's settled. Is that okay with you, Mr. Forrest? But Mr. Forrest was busy confronting Miss Forrest, who still hadn't stopped crying. He just looked at Bobby and nodded silently. Bobby went to the kitchen, took one of the keys off the wall, and looked at Mr. Buchanan. All right, Mr. Buchanan, let me show you to your room. I thought I saw a creepy half-deranged smile cross his face. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Give me something comfy with a nice view." Mr. Buchanan sounded confident, but it was clear he was just trying to put on a strong face in front of his wife. "Sugar pie," Amber called out to him, her voice tense with worry. "Grace, could you go and get 2 or 3 blankets? Grab a few magazines to read while you're at it, little darling." Bobby stiffened and stared at him angrily. He was clearly feeling irritated at Mr. Buchanan's breezy, defiant attitude. Still, this time he managed to control his temper without exploding. Grace went to her room and, after a few minutes, returned with the magazines and blankets. "Alright then. Nighty-night, y'all." Taking the requested items, Mr. Buchanan smiled brightly and turned towards the open cellar door. Then he slowly descended, his back illuminated by an eerie red light shining from a naked bulb. When he disappeared from sight, Bobby closed the door and carefully locked it. "Now we can all relax and get some sleep." Grace and I looked at each other and nodded uneasily. He was right, wasn't he? We had nothing to worry about anymore. So why were we both unable to shake off a lingering premonition of doom? Don't worry about it. When we got back to the lounge, Bobby handed the key to Mr. Forrest. "You can let him out after we all wake up tomorrow." "Huh?" "Yeah, okay," answered Mr. Forrest distractedly. It was hard to tell who was the boss and who was the employee. "You two should get some sleep. There's nothing left for us to do tonight. We just have to hope the weather improves tomorrow." "Yeah, I guess you're right. Come on, Colleen, let's head back to our room." Mr. Forrest put his arm around his wife's shoulders and helped her to her feet. Even now, she seemed to be having a hard time controlling her tears. The only ones left were myself, Grace, Bobby, Faberge, and Mr. Buchanan's wife, Amber. "My husband, you really think he did those horrible things?" Amber asked in a quiet voice. I was surprised. I was expecting her to vehemently protest her husband's innocence, but to ask if I really thought he was guilty? What kind of a married couple were they anyway? I just made the logical conclusion based upon what we know. Hey, you can't backtrack now. He's the killer, right? With Bobby putting the question to me so directly, I was starting to feel more conflicted than ever. I don't know. "Do you think that's how a murderer would react?" Faberge asked, frowning. He's just confident because he knows we don't have any real proof," Bobby responded bitterly. "But the forensics expert should be able to find plenty of evidence, right?" "Well, he seems to think he didn't leave any, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm heading back to my room. See you all in the morning." And with that, Bobby headed back to his room. Those of us that remained settled into an uncomfortable silence until Amber looked down and began to speak. "I'm his second wife." Not knowing what to say, I looked to Grace for help, but she seemed equally ill at ease. "That man, you wouldn't believe how sweet he can be. Not just to me, but to the children too. Of course, I know they say terrible things about him at work, that he's some kind of demon boss with a horrible temper. But I don't know the first thing about what he does at his job. I only know the side I see, and it's incredibly kind. But even if someone at his company hated him and was out for revenge, that wouldn't be enough reason to kill him, right? For some reason, I found myself defending Mr. Buchanan. Maybe, but if he thought someone was out to get him, he might try to kill him first, don't you think?" Faberge asked after giving it some thought. It seemed plausible enough. Maybe that Mr. Jones guy had a grudge against Mr. Buchanan and came out here to murder him. Grace, putting on her best cheerful voice, interrupted. "Anyway, why don't you try to get some rest, Amber? We're all tired, and I don't think we can figure anything else out tonight." Amber must have agreed because she stood up with a weak smile and walked slowly, falteringly, towards her room. Faberge watched her the whole way like some kind of bearded mother hen. Wow, the words. Then he said, "Well, I'm going to turn in too. What about you two?" "Yeah." I had been planning to go back to my room at some point, but since Grace and I were in separate rooms, that would mean leaving her on her own. I really didn't feel comfortable with that now. I mean, we should be safe, right? With Mr. Buchanan locked up in the cellar. I don't know, I'm a bit iffy about that. Grace, do you want to come my room? I came right out and said it. At a time like this, that's what you're thinking about, Max? No, wait, I'm just... Well, I'll come with you, but don't do anything funny. Of course not. We didn't feel safe turning off the lights, so we left them on and went to our rooms. On the way there, Faberge teetered a bit and looked like he was about to fall. Are you okay? Yeah, sorry. I just felt a little dizzy for a second. But he managed to make it the rest of the way to his room. Well, take care. With those parting words, Faberge opened his door and went into his room. Take care. Never in my life had that phrase carried so much meaning when I heard him say it. I opened the door to my room and let her enter first. Oh man, it's getting sensual in here apparently. And we're going to stop here, and we'll come back next time for more Banshee's Last Cry. I hope you guys enjoyed today. It was interesting. Hopefully we'll make it to the morning. Thanks for watching. Bye!